background information on the development of the cannon. We will be exploring the development of bombs and gunpowder throughout history.
First, let's talk about the development of gunpowder throughout history and how its ingredients have changed over time to be better used in the cannon. Early use of nitrates in gunpowder dates back to Chinese alchemists in 900 AD, who noted that when thrown onto a fire, the nitrates combusted spontaneously and very violently. Now, other substances besides nitrates were known that combusted violently, but they were not as adaptable and therefore useful for military purposes. Now, for nitrates to be made useful for military purposes, they first need to be purified using a method of fractional crystallization and treated with using wood ashes. Now, nitrates were not found in large mineral quantities as they were soluble in water, so the minerals would dissolve away wherever water was present. This made nitrates very costly and very expensive for militaries to use in the development of their gunpowder.
One of the earliest uses of gunpowder used to launch an object was fire lance. Used in the Chinese military, a bamboo or metal shaft was loaded with combustible powder and projectiles and lit by a fuse extending from the muzzle.
Gunpowder is also called black powder, made up of a mixture of potassium nitrate, sulfur, and carbon in the form of wood charcoal. It is obtained by the Haber process, where ammonia is synthesized from atmospheric nitrate and then oxidized to form nitrates.
Lastly, the products produced with gunpowder explodes are 40% gaseous and 60% solid. When exploding, gunpowder increases in volume by about 4,000 times when pressure conditions are normal. So an incredibly compressed gas is formed behind the cannonball in a very short amount of time.
Now let's talk a little bit about bombs. Bombs became known as shells by 1800, coming from the German word shale. Bombs were a hollow sphere of cast iron with a port into which a fuse could be hammered. The largest bombs, or shells, were about 13 inches in diameter, 2 inches thick, and held a little over 10 pounds of powder. Bombs shattered on impact, sending fragments of shrapnel everywhere when they exploded. Other bombs that existed include handheld bombs known as grenades that were thrown instead of having to launch the bombs out of cannons. By the 1800s, when bombs became known as shells, the largest shells were shot out of a mortar.
Now that we have a little bit of background as to the advancement of gunpowder and early uses and types of bombs, let's talk a little bit about 3 types of cannons throughout in history, ranging from medieval times to present.
The trebuchet was one of the first war machines to use principles such as gravity and leverage to hurl a projectile. It was first used in the Middle Ages by the Chinese. Now, prior to the use of the trebuchet, most other weaponry had complex processes that hurled a projectile. Given that the trebuchet was made of very simple components, it was not subject to the catastrophic failures that other more complex weapons were subject to. Torsion and tension engines in earlier cannons required numerous precision-made parts such as metallic gears, locks, and hinges in order to perform maintenance and just regular construction. However, the trebuchet could be easily assembled on the battlefield from rough-cut lumber and natural stones, making it a lot more convenient for forces to use than earlier cannons. The trebuchet were formidable against even the strongest fortresses. They could hurl larger stones over longer distances and with tremendous force. The medieval trebuchet required very good design and building skills. They were made to order and far too big and sizable to move from place to place. Engineers would instruct soldiers on the field on how to construct a trebuchet when the commander thinks that it's required. Now, the trebuchet has a simple design that offers it significant advantages over the more complex weaponry that's offered, as we previously discussed. A team of haulers pull down on a network of ropes attached to the bottom of the machine's throwing arm, and then an engineer stationed at the front of the throwing arm loads ammunition into the firing cup, operating the trebuchet and hurling a large piece of ammunition a long distance.
The Saker was a medium cannon slightly smaller than the culverin, developed during the early 16th century and often used by the English. The early Saker's barrel was approximately 9.5 feet long, had a caliber of 3.25 inches, and weighed approximately 1,900 pounds. Tests performed in France during the 1950s show a Saker's range was over 9,000 feet when fired at a 45-degree angle. Henry VIII possessed a large arsenal of sakers in the 16th century. Sakers were heavily used during the English Civil War, especially during sieges when they were used by both attackers and defenders of fortified towns. The saker's shot was intended to bounce along the ground to cause as much damage as possible, giving the attackers an advantage over the other side.
Howitzers were originally developed in the near turn of the 18th century. Most howitzers were smoothbore weapons. Howitzers produced by the Federal included bronze cannons used for field use and iron cannons used for siege, garrison, and seacoast defense. The prototype was developed and constructed in the Army's Rock Island Arsenal in 1969, and firing tests began in 1970. Following initial firing tests, 2 prototype M198 howitzers were delivered to the Army in 1972, and following additional testing, the M198 howitzer entered full-time production in 1978. Since entering production, over 1,600 units have been manufactured, with the final units coming out of a Rock Island in 1992. The M198 has a sustained rate of fire of 4 rounds per minute. The howitzer maximum range is 18,100 meters when firing standard 95-pound projectile. The howitzer could also fire a shell over 1,000 yards with less than 1 pound of powder, giving the side using the cannon an advantage because of the limited amount of gunpowder needed.
For our medieval civilization, we chose to research the Song Dynasty, a civilization that lasted from 960 to 1279 AD. Now, one of the Song Dynasty's greatest developments was that of gunpowder, an invention that greatly affects the world today and has played a role in countless conflicts and wars. Song people used gunpowder to make various weapons, specifically fire lances, also called fire-spurting lances. These were essentially flamethrowers, with bamboo materials used for the barrel of the gun, a fuse extending from the muzzle of the gun that would be used to light the fire lance, and the entire thing wrapped carefully with twine to keep it together. Now, Song military engineers also used gunpowder in rockets, bombs, mines, and cannons. The military manual from the Song Dynasty dating back to 1044 is one of, if not the, earliest recording of a true gunpowder formula and how to mass produce it. Now, the Song Dynasty was greatly advanced and protected by their use of gunpowder, as it allowed them to hold off attacks from the Mongols for multiple decades, although the Mongols did advance their own technology by capturing and interrogating Song engineers and gunners for their gunpowder formula. The use of gunpowder was incredibly significant in its impact on the conflict. Besides fire lances, it was also used to create bombs that released shards of scrap iron metal and arrows to which were attached small packages of gunpowder with a fuse. Weapons without gunpowder the Song employed include spears, swords, and bows and arrows. Although the fire lance may not be considered a cannon, it was one of the first weapons in the world to use gunpowder in its explosion process and protected the Song Dynasty at a time of great conflict.
For our post-Renaissance civilization, we chose America during the Civil War. Many weapons were created during the Civil War, including rifles, submarines, and other rifle-barreled field artillery. Cannons were made more mobile so that they could be moved around a lot easier. Cannons could be placed in certain positions and pushed forward or pulled back at any time. Cannons were used during the Civil War against buildings, fortifications, infantry, and ships, which aided a lot in the Union victory. Innovations made during the Civil War impacted the future of weapons throughout history and the United States as a society. For our modern civilization, we chose to focus on Germany during World War II. At the beginning of the war, Hitler wanted to create a weapon that would penetrate the French Maginot Line, which was a barrier between the Nazis and the rest of Western Europe. So, one of Germany's top manufacturers began to develop the Great Gustav cannon, which weighed 1,350 tons and could fire 10-ton shells through a 30-meter pipe. It was the biggest cannon ever built at the time and remains that today. Gustav and other cannons were used by the Nazis during the siege of Sevastopol and the Warsaw Uprising of 1944 to fight Allied troops. This cannon, along with other World War II weapons, were extremely important and had a huge impact on World War II and Germany.